He grabbed my wrist before I could reach my mother. His fingers were like iron pressing into the bones beneath my skin. The whiskey on his breath was thick enough to sting my eyes. "You stay out of this." "Clara," he barked, but I had already stepped between him and her. The snow outside the window blurred into the yellow light of the living room, turning everything pale and cold. My stepfather, Dean Reynolds, stood over my mother, face red, jaw tight, his badge from another life still hanging on the wall behind him. He had not been a cop for 10 years, but he carried authority like a weapon he could never surrender. "Dean, please," my mother whispered. She was trembling, her hands clutching the back of the sofa like she might anchor herself to it. The argument had started over dinner over something small, her forgetting to pay a bill. It never took much for him to explode. I reached out, touched her shoulder. "Mom, go to your room. I'll handle it." The moment I said it, I saw the rage flicker in his eyes, something primal and offended. "You'll handle it." His voice cracked like a whip. "You think you can tell me what to do in my house?" "It's not your house," I said before I could stop myself. The words were out like glass shards. His jaw flexed. He stepped closer. "Say that again." "You heard me." My mother whispered my name, her voice shaking. "Clara, please." I turned to her, trying to calm her down, when I felt the air shift behind me. He moved fast. There was the sound of breaking glass before I even registered the pain. My body hit the table, then the floor. The world went white, then red, then blurred into the sound of my mother screaming. I tried to get up, but my left arm folded under me slick with blood. I saw shards of glass scattered like ice. Dean's shadow loomed above me. "You're not family," he growled, pointing at me like I was something he could erase. "You never were." My mother rushed forward, grabbing his arm. "Stop! Please, stop!" He pushed her away like she was made of paper. She stumbled, hitting the wall. My head throbbed, every heartbeat echoing against the floor. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint wail of a siren. It grew louder, closer, cutting through the cold Minnesota air. Dean stepped back, breathing hard, realizing what he had done. "Don't call anyone," he said. "It was an accident. You tripped. You tell them that." He crouched near me, voice low but trembling. "You understand, right? You fell." I looked at him through the blur of tears and blood. "You'll regret this." He stood pacing, muttering to himself. The sirens were right outside now. Red and blue light washed through the window, flashing across the family photos on the wall. My mother knelt beside me, pressing a towel to my forehead. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Please." I tried to focus on her face, but it kept fading in and out. "Who called them?" Dean demanded. My mother didn't answer. She just held me tighter. The door burst open, paramedics rushing in. I could barely hear their voices. Female, mid-30s, head trauma. The air filled with the smell of antiseptic snow and fear. They lifted me onto the stretcher. I saw the name tag on the paramedic's uniform pierce. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. My grandfather's name was still stitched on that same badge when he served 40 years ago. "Stay still, ma'am," the paramedic said, checking my pulse. "We've got you." I blinked, trying to speak, but only a rasp came out. "Pierce," I whispered. "What?" "Your badge." My grandfather had one just like it. He looked at me puzzled, but kept working. Dean hovered near the doorway, trying to look concerned. "She fell," he said quickly. "The table broke." The younger EMT gave him a look. "We'll handle it, sir." My mother followed the stretcher outside her coat, half on snowflakes catching in her hair. The cold hit my face like needles. I saw the house behind us glowing with warm light, so normal it looked staged. The kind of place where bad things are never supposed to happen. They loaded me into the ambulance. The door slammed shut. The siren came alive again. Through the haze, I caught one last glimpse of Dean standing on the porch, his hand still stained with my blood. I could read the fear on his face, not fear for me, but fear of losing control. As the ambulance pulled away, I whispered to myself, maybe to the dark, maybe to God. He said I wasn't family, but the man who saved me wore my grandfather's number. The smell of antiseptic hit me first. It burned in my nose, sharper than the pain in my head. I opened my eyes to a blur of white lights and movement. For a moment, I thought I was still on the floor, but the faint rhythm of wheels beneath me told me I was being rolled somewhere. My voice barely worked. "Where you're at?" "St. Paul Hospital," a nurse said. Her face leaned into view, kind but professional. "Try not to move, sweetheart. You've got a nasty cut." The light overhead stung. Every blink hurt. I could hear monitors beeping, footsteps echoing against tile. Someone asked, "What happened to her?" Another voice answered, "Fall through a glass table. Head trauma. Possible concussion." The lie traveled fast. I felt a small surge of shame for not correcting them, but fear sat heavier. Dean's voice echoed in my memory. "You fell. You tell them that." The nurse helped me sit up slowly. My reflection in a steel tray caught my eye, blood matted in my hair stitches along my temple. I looked like someone else, someone who lived in the kind of house neighbors whispered about. Was it him, the EMT who had brought me in, asked quietly from the corner? He was still there, packing up his bag. His badge read Pierce, the same name that had jolted through my mind before. What I asked. "The man who said you fell. Was it him?" My pulse jumped. "It was an accident," I said, forcing my eyes down. He studied me a second longer, then nodded like he understood something I couldn't say. "You should let the doctor check for internal bleeding," he said instead. A police officer appeared in the doorway, a small notebook in his hand. "Evening, ma'am. Officer Lewis. Mind if I ask a few questions?" My mouth was dry. "Sure. How'd you fall?" His tone was flat procedural. I gave the line Dean rehearsed into me. I tripped. The table broke. He nodded, scribbling. "Anyone witness it?" "My mother. And your stepfather." The word twisted in my gut. He was there too. He stopped writing for a second. "He's a retired officer, right?" "Yes." "All right." He pocketed the notebook. "I'm gonna log this as a suspicious domestic injury, just protocol. You can call if you change your mind." He slid his card onto the tray next to me and walked out. My eyes followed the card, Detective Lewis, St. Paul Police Department Family Violence Unit. The irony stung. The nurse finished cleaning my stitches and left me alone. For the first time since the blow, silence filled the room. I watched the snow fall outside, the small window flakes turning into streaks of white against the glass. Minnesota winters have a way of making you feel trapped inside your own breath. I thought of my mother. Was she still at home with him? I pictured her making excuses, pouring another drink for him, telling herself he just lost his temper. That is how victims protect their abusers, by protecting the story. My head pounded with each heartbeat. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. 2 messages from Dean. The first, "Say nothing. Insurance will cover it." The second, "You better not ruin this family again." Again. That word tore something loose. He said it like I was the one who broke it. I pressed delete, then opened the camera app and looked at my reflection. The stitches glinted under fluorescent light. Proof. I took a photo, then another. My mother used to say I was too much like my father, calm, until I wasn't. He died when I was 12, a car crash that felt like an unfinished sentence. Dean came a year later, loud and charming, a hero with a badge and a temper hidden behind smiles. I remembered his wedding toast, "Family is earned, not given." Back then I thought he meant love had to be proven. Now I understood he meant obedience. The nurse returned with discharge papers. "You'll need rest, maybe some observation at home. No sudden movements, and if anything feels off, come back." "Thanks." She paused at the door. "You sure you don't want to talk to someone?" "We have a counselor on call." I shook my head. "Not tonight." When she left, I slid the police card into my pocket and stared at the empty doorway. My reflection in the window looked small, pale, unfamiliar. Somewhere out there, Dean was probably washing the blood off the floor, setting another plate on the table like nothing happened. My mother would sit quietly, her shoulders tense, rehearsing lines for when I came home. I lay back, counting the pulse in my wrist until it slowed. I tried to picture my grandfather's face the last time I saw him. I was 16, standing on his porch. Dean's car idling in the drive. My grandfather, Judge Walter Pierce, had said then, "You can't silence the truth forever, Clara. It finds its own witness." I had not understood then how right he was. A soft knock pulled me from the memory. The EMT Pierce leaned in again. Ma'am, just so you know, we filed the report under mandatory domestic suspicion. They might call you tomorrow. You don't have to talk if you're not ready, but it's on record now. I nodded throat tight. Thank you. Take care, he said and left. When the door closed, I whispered into the quiet. You said I wasn't family, Dean. Then maybe it's time I remember the one I do have. Snow was still falling when the cab stopped in front of the house. The driver looked at me through the rearview mirror, his eyes flicking toward the bandage wrapped around my head. You sure you're good to go in alone, miss? He asked. I nodded, forcing a thin smile. Yeah, thanks. My breath turned to fog as I stepped out. The yard lights glowed yellow against the snow, the same warm hue that made strangers think it was a safe home. But I knew better. The curtain in the living room shifted someone watching. I pushed open the door and walked into the silence. The smell of disinfectant still lingered faintly under the scent of fried food. My mother sat on the couch, hands folded, eyes fixed on the TV, but not really watching. Dean stood by the fireplace, his drink half empty, the ice melting slow. For a moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with something that wasn't forgiveness. You're home, my mother said, voice small. Doctor said you could leave. They did. My stepfather smiled tightly. Good. We were worried. He said it like a line rehearsed for a play. His eyes flicked to the stitches above my eyebrow. Looks worse than it is, huh? It's fine. I kept my coat on, standing near the doorway. My mother stood too, wringing her hands. Dinner's still warm, she said. Sit. Eat something. I'm not hungry. Dean took a sip, then leaned against the mantel. Sit anyway. It looks bad when you sulk after a misunderstanding. I wanted to laugh. Misunderstanding. The word almost sounded innocent. You mean after you hit me? I asked. The smile on his face faltered just slightly. I told you you fell. We all know that. Do we? I looked at my mother. She couldn't meet my eyes. Mom. Her lips parted, but no words came. Just silence, the same kind that filled every corner of this house. Dean exhaled, slow, controlled. We're not doing this. Not tonight. You've had a shock. We all have. I already filed the insurance claim for the table, so sign it when you can. They'll cover the medical bill. He reached to the counter, grabbed a folder, and slid it toward me. I glanced down. Claim of accidental injury. His handwriting was bold, deliberate. Sign where I marked, he said. I'll mail it in tomorrow. Sure. I took it, pretending to read, while my mind clicked through every angle. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice, that old courtroom tone. Always sign your truth. Second, never first. I signed then, excused myself to the kitchen. While Dean and my mother resumed their strange pantomime of normalcy, I quietly turned on the old printer, slid the page under the scanner, and made a copy. The machine hummed softly, hidden by the sound of the TV. I folded the duplicate and tucked it inside my coat pocket. When I returned, Dean was lighting the fireplace, the orange flames flickering against his face. See, he said lightly. Family again. Just one bad night. My mother smiled weakly, her hands trembling as she passed him another drink. I stood there staring at the photo above the mantel, my father's old picture next to Dean's police commendation. My father's frame was slightly tilted, like even in death he couldn't stand next to the man who replaced him. Dean noticed my gaze. You know your dad was a good man. Shame he left your mom to pick up the pieces. I turned slowly. You mean shame he died? He shrugged. Same thing. He wasn't here. I was. Right, I said quietly. You were. He smiled again, that same controlled curve of lips that said he thought he'd won. My mother finally spoke, almost pleading. Clara, let's not fight. Please. I just want peace. Peace doesn't come from pretending Mom. She looked at me like I'd slapped her. Dean stepped in, voice smooth. You're tired. You've been through enough. Why don't you go rest? I'll take care of your mother. You always do, I said. He chuckled, but the sound had no warmth. We'll talk tomorrow, he said, dismissing me like a child. I climbed the stairs slowly, every step measured. The bruises on my arms pulsed with my heartbeat. In the hallway, I paused outside my old room. The door was slightly open. I could hear the faint murmur of their voices downstairs. She's unstable, Dean said. Hospitals mess with her memory. She won't tell anyone. Dean, stop, my mother whispered. You hurt her. She'll thank me when this blows over. His voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. I shut my door and leaned against it, letting the sound fade. The room was cold, untouched since I left years ago. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the insurance copy from my coat pocket, staring at my signature like it belonged to someone else. I thought about the photo I took in the hospital, the stitches, the bruises. Proof. The kind of truth that couldn't be silenced forever. I hid the paper in an old book on the nightstand and pulled the blanket over me, fully dressed. Sleep came in waves, each one breaking against the thought of his words. You're not family. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my door. The handle turned slightly, then stopped. The silence stretched until I heard him walk away. I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, knowing he would never stop until someone made him. And maybe that someone had to be me. In the darkness, I whispered to myself, he taught me to stay quiet, but silence is loyalty with no justice. I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of dishes clinking downstairs. For a moment, I thought maybe everything had been a dream, that my head didn't ache and the bandage wasn't still there. But the pain was real, dull and steady, the reminder of how far things had gone. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that meant everyone was pretending. I went downstairs. Dean sat at the table reading the paper like he always did, like nothing in the world was broken. My mother was at the sink, her movements careful, her eyes hollow. Morning, he said without looking up. You sleep enough. Good. I made coffee. I poured myself a cup and sat opposite him. His badge from his police days was on the shelf behind him, polished every week. He caught me looking at it. Reminds me who I am, he said. Keeps me steady. I thought about how many times he'd used that same badge to threaten us when he was angry. The authority never left him. It just changed shape. He folded his paper. You'll stay close this week. Doctor said rest right, I'll be fine. Didn't ask if you'd be fine. Said stay close. My mother's hands stilled in the sink. I stared at him. You don't get to tell me what to do. Of course I do. This is my house. I almost laughed. You paid for it with her money. He gave me that half smile again, the one that didn't touch his eyes. Everything in this house is mine now, Clara. That's how marriage works. I wanted to say something sharp, but my mother's quiet please cut through the air. That word had become the anthem of our lives. Please don't. Please stop. Please just let it go. He stood and placed a hand on her shoulder, too firm to be affection. You're shaking, he said. Relax. I saw her flinch. I stood up. She's fine, I said. He looked at me, then at her. Go upstairs, Clara. You're starting to sound like him. The word him meant my father. I felt the ground tilt. You don't get to use his name, I said. He was a better man on his worst day than you'll ever be. His eyes narrowed. Careful. Or what? You'll prove me right again. My mother gasped softly. Please stop, she whispered. I turned and left the room before it could turn violent again. Upstairs, I opened my old closet. My father's watch was still there, wrapped in a small cloth box. I held it the second hand, still ticking faintly after all these years, and wondered how much of his patience still lived in me. Dean hadn't always been this way. At least, not at first. When my mother married him, he was charming, protective, generous in that performative way that made neighbors adore him. It wasn't until after the wedding that the rules started, what to wear, when to speak, who I could call. By the time I turned 15, he had locked my phone at night and cut off contact with my father's side of the family. They fill your head with ideas, he'd said. You're better off without them. The worst was when I tried to call my grandfather. I still remember standing by the phone in the kitchen, whispering into the receiver. Grandpa, it's me. His voice had cracked with joy, and that was the sound that betrayed me. Dean ripped the cord from the wall. You don't need that old man filling your head with nonsense about justice, he shouted. Justice doesn't feed you. I do. Then came the slap. I learned to stop calling. The control tightened each year, curfews, finances, every decision filtered through him. When I left for EMT training at 20, it was the first time I could breathe. But he still found ways to reach in. Calls from my mother begging me not to anger him. Messages reminding me who paid for my tuition. The control didn't end when you left. It just changed distance. That morning after coffee, I walked to the mailbox just to feel air on my face. The snow had turned to a thin crust of ice crunching beneath my boots. I opened the mailbox and froze. Inside was a small stack of unopened letters, all addressed to me, postmarked over several years. My stomach twisted. The handwriting was familiar, neat, firm strokes. Walter Pierce, my grandfather. I looked toward the window. Dean was watching from inside. I tucked the letters under my coat and went straight upstairs. My hands shook as I opened the first one. Dated 2 years ago. Clara, I hope this finds you well. I'm told Dean has been in contact about the trust. There are things you should know, things that may not wait. I tore open another. You haven't written back, so I'll keep this short. If he ever crosses the line, and I believe he will, there are documents you must see. They're safe until you come to me. Each envelope felt heavier than the last. The most recent was 6 months old. The words blurred. The family trust is being altered. Your mother may not be aware. Please, if things get worse, come to Duluth. You'll be protected here. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen him in 16 years. Dean must have intercepted every letter. The mailbox key was on his ring. He'd decided what reached me and what didn't. My phone buzzed on the desk. A message from him. Dinner at 6. Don't be late. I stared at the letters at the truth finally finding its way through the cracks. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I felt angry, sharp, alive. The silence he had built was starting to crumble. I slipped the letters into my coat pocket, already planning. If my grandfather was right, if there were documents that proved what Dean had done, then maybe there was still a way out. Maybe justice wasn't just a word people said to feel better. I whispered into the cold room. You wanted control, Dean? Let's see how you handle losing it. The house was quiet again that afternoon, the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I locked my bedroom door and spread the letters across the bed. Each one carried a faint smell of tobacco and old paper, the scent of my grandfather's study. The ink was slightly faded, but his handwriting was as sharp as I remembered, tight, deliberate, like every word had been weighed before landing. I unfolded the most recent letter carefully. Clara, if you're reading this, then I suspect Dean has done what I feared. He's using your mother's signature to move assets from her late husband's estate into a company he controls. The name on paper is CMR Holdings. The real name behind it is his own. If he crosses the line, come find me. There's a reason I never removed your name from the trust. My pulse raced. A chill ran down my arms that had nothing to do with the Minnesota winter. My grandfather had seen this coming. He had known. I sat back staring at the words until they blurred. CMR, Clara Marjorie Reynolds. He had used our initials. The arrogance made my stomach turn. Downstairs, I heard the muffled hum of the television, the clink of a bottle. Dean always got louder when he thought no one was listening. I tucked the letters into a small folder and slid it beneath my jacket. My plan was simple enough in theory: get to Duluth, find my grandfather, find the documents. But simplicity was dangerous in Dean's world. He had eyes everywhere. I could almost hear his voice in my head. You don't go anywhere without my say. I packed quietly a change of clothes, the letters, my phone charger, the copy of the insurance claim. My hand brushed against my father's old watch on the nightstand. I slipped it on the tick of the second-hand steady grounding. When I turned toward the door, I stopped. My mother's shadow stood in the hallway, her voice low. Where are you going? To see Grandpa? I said, keeping my tone even. You can't, she whispered. Dean will. Dean doesn't get to decide that anymore. Her eyes filled with something between fear and apology. You don't understand, Clara. He has everything. The house, the accounts. He stole it. Mom, Grandpa's letters prove it. She flinched like the truth itself hurt. Don't make it worse, she said, clutching the doorway. Please. It's already worse, I replied. You just stopped calling it that. For a moment, she looked at me like she might follow, but the sound of Dean's footsteps on the stairs snapped her back. Go, she mouthed. I slipped past her and down the back door, the snow crunching under my boots as I ran toward the car. The air bit at my face, sharp and alive. By the time I reached the main road, my hands were trembling not from cold, but adrenaline. The drive to Duluth would take a few hours long enough to think long enough to regret if I let fear win. The highway stretched empty under a sky the color of pewter. Every mile felt like shedding skin, leaving behind a version of me that kept quiet. I stopped once for gas, keeping my head down as I bought coffee and checked my phone. 3 missed calls from my mother, 1 from Dean. No messages. He never left words when silence worked better. I turned the phone off. The last hour of the drive passed in fragments, the wind hitting the windshield, the hum of the tires, the echo of his voice in my mind. "You're not family," I whispered back to the dark. "Then I have nothing left to lose." Duluth appeared out of the snow like an old photograph, gray, quiet, solid. I hadn't been there since high school. The city smelled of salt and pine. My grandfather's house sat on a hill overlooking the frozen lake, the same porch light glowing faintly against the storm. I parked, heart hammering. The walk to the door felt longer than the entire drive. I knocked once, then again. The door opened slowly. He stood there taller than I remembered, older, but not weaker. His hair was silver now, his gaze sharp and tired. "Clara," he said simply, like he had been expecting me. My throat tightened. "You wrote me." "I did." "You didn't answer." "He never let me see them." He nodded once. "Come in." The house was warm, the smell of cedar and coffee filling the air. Books lined the walls, every shelf precise. It looked exactly as it had when I was a child, except smaller somehow. He poured coffee into 2 mugs and sat across from me at the table. "You look like your father," he said quietly. I didn't know what to say. "He said you had something for me," I finally managed. "I do." He reached for a drawer, pulled out a small metal USB drive, and placed it between us. "That has everything. Financial transfers, forged signatures, the shell accounts Dean used. I couldn't intervene before without proof you wanted it." I picked it up, the metal cold in my palm. "He's been hurting her," I said. "And me." His jaw tightened. "I know. You knew I suspected. He's the kind of man who mistakes silence for permission." The words hit hard. "What do I do with this?" "You do what you were trained to do," he said. "Gather evidence. Don't confront him yet. Let the truth speak first." I wanted to cry or yell or something, but all I managed was a whisper. "I thought you forgot about us." "I never forget my blood," he said. "He told me you didn't want me." That's how abusers keep power, Clara. They isolate and rewrite history. But you found your way back, and that means the story isn't his anymore. I looked down at the USB, the faint engraving on the side, Pierce 2019, proof and legacy in one small object. When he crosses the line, "Come find me." I repeated his letter aloud. He crossed it. My grandfather nodded once, slow and certain. Then it's time. The next morning, snow covered the steps in a thin, perfect layer as if the world had paused to listen. I woke on my grandfather's old leather couch, the sound of the kettle hissing in the kitchen. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. Then the smell of cedar and coffee hit me again, and the memories came back. Dean's voice, my mother's silence, the letters. My body ached, but not from fear this time. It was the ache of distance closing, of truth, finally finding a place to land. I sat up slowly. The blanket he had placed over me had the faint scent of his cologne, old-fashioned and comforting. He was standing by the window, watching the snow drift across the frozen lake. The morning light carved deep lines into his face, but his posture was still that of a man who once commanded a courtroom. "You didn't sleep much," he said without turning. "Neither did you," I replied. "Age steals hours," he said, half smiling. "Coffee's ready." I joined him in the kitchen. The table was already set, 2 mugs, a plate of toast, and a stack of papers weighted down by a brass pin. "That from last night?" I asked, nodding at the papers. "Documentation," he said. "Dean's been clever, but not invisible. I kept tabs after your father died. It wasn't hard to predict where greed would lead." I took a sip of coffee, the warmth grounding me. "He always thought no one would believe me. That's what men like him count on," he said. "Isolation. Reputation. You break that by being methodical, not loud." "You sound like a judge," I said. I was one he reminded me with a small smile. Habit dies hard. He slid one document across the table, a transfer sheet. This is from CMR Holdings. Your mother's signature is forged. She's technically lost legal claim to her own inheritance. I stared at the signature. I had seen my mother's handwriting all my life. The curl on the M was wrong. Dean's version of her was cleaner mechanical. How do we prove it? I asked. I already have, he said, tapping the USB. What you'll need to do is record him confirming what he did. He won't confess directly, but he'll gloat. Abusers always need an audience. He doesn't trust me, I said. Then give him a reason to. He looked at me, eyes steady. Do you want revenge or do you want proof? What's the difference? Revenge feeds you for a night, he said. Proof saves you for a lifetime. I sat back, absorbing the words. I can't go back there, I said. Not yet. You'll have to, he said gently, but not empty-handed. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a prepaid card, a list of contact names, and a small black recording device the size of a coin. You'll need this, he said, and you'll need courage. You think I still have that? You're here, aren't you? He said. His voice softened. Your father would have been proud. My throat tightened. I don't even remember his voice anymore. Then remember his silence, he said. He kept peace until it killed him. Don't do the same. We sat in quiet for a moment, the only sound the tick of the clock and the whistle of the wind outside. What if he finds out I asked? He will, he said simply. Men like Dean always do. The question is when, and by then you'll be ready. He stood moving slowly toward the bookshelf, pulling out a worn leather binder. This is the trust clause, he said. Clause 14. It states that any individual who disowns a blood descendant forfeits all trust privileges. You think that will matter to him? It'll matter when it's read aloud. His tone carried the weight of certainty, like he had already written the ending. I spent the rest of the day going through files, learning more than I ever wanted to about the quiet war between money and morality. Dean had been shifting assets for 5 years, hiding them under LLCs, using my mother's name as a shield. My grandfather had copies of it all. How did you get this? I asked. Judges collect favors, he said. I used mine. The sun began to set bleeding orange across the frozen lake. I helped him close the blinds, the familiar creak of the wooden floor beneath us. You'll go back tomorrow, he said. Stay calm. Let him believe he's still in control. Control is his addiction, and if he gets violent again... He looked at me over his glasses. Then call me. Not the police. I am the police, he said dryly, then softer. At least what's left of it. We both laughed quietly, though there wasn't much humor in it. Before bed, I stepped outside onto the porch. The cold bit into my cheeks, the kind that wakes your blood. The lake stretched endless before me, silent and white. I thought about my mother, about how fear becomes routine, how silence turns into language. I thought about all the times I convinced myself it wasn't that bad, that he didn't mean it, that he'd change. The night air didn't forgive lies like that. Behind me, my grandfather's voice called softly. You still have your father's watch. Yes. Good. Keep it wound. It runs better when you believe time can still fix things. I turned, meeting his eyes. I'll try. Don't try, he said. Do. He went back inside, and I stayed a little longer, letting the cold sink in deep enough to remember. When I finally closed the door, I looked at the small black recorder on the table. It caught the light from the lamp, a tiny reflection of everything that could change. I picked it up, held it tight, and whispered to myself, proof, not revenge. The words tasted like resolve. Upstairs, I packed again, slower this time. The USB, the recorder, the letters, and the photo of my parents. Before I turned off the light, I looked out the window one last time. Snow still fell, covering everything, the way silence covers pain, softly, completely, until something warm touches it again. Tomorrow, I would drive back to the house I grew up in. I didn't know what would happen. I only knew I wasn't coming back the same. I reached home just after noon the next day. The snow had melted into gray slush, the sky low and heavy like it was watching. Dean's truck was already in the driveway, his presence as solid as a bad smell that never left. I sat in the car for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel, reminding myself of the weight of the recorder in my coat pocket and the USB hidden under the seat. Proof, not revenge. My grandfather's voice played on repeat in my mind. When I stepped inside, the house looked exactly the same. Same pictures, same smell of disinfectant and stale whiskey, same ghostly quiet. My mother was in the kitchen, her eyes widening when she saw me. "Clara," she whispered. "He's been waiting." Before I could answer, his voice floated in from the living room. "Well, look who decided to come home." Dean stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, his police jacket slung over a chair like a trophy. "I was wondering if you'd run off to your old man's family again." "I just needed air," I said, setting my bag down. "Air." He chuckled, stepping closer. "You make it sound like this place suffocates you." I looked at him steady. "Doesn't it?" His smile faltered just for a second, then he turned away. "Don't start with your drama. Your mother's got enough on her plate." He poured himself a drink, even though it was barely afternoon. "You want one? No. Suit yourself." I took a deep breath, forcing calm into my voice. "Dean, we need to talk about the finances." He froze mid-sip. "Finances. The house. The accounts. Mom's name isn't showing on the insurance anymore." "You been snooping again." His tone sharpened. "You got no right. I live here too." "You stay here," he corrected. "Big difference." I let the recorder in my pocket run his every word, captured in a silent hum. "CMR Holdings," I said. "You used her signature, didn't you?" His jaw clenched. "Watch your mouth." "Or what?" "You'll hit me again." He took a slow step forward, the glass in his hand trembling slightly. "You think you can trap me with your little accusations? You forget who trained half the cops in this county." His voice dropped low, a growl. "I know every loophole, Clara. Every one." My mother appeared in the doorway, pale. "Dean, please." He turned to her, softening instantly. "Honey, she's just upset." Hospital rattled her. The way he could shift masks in a heartbeat made my stomach twist. "Why don't you take a rest, sweetheart?" he told her. "I'll handle her." "No," I said. "She stays." He looked back at me, and something cold flickered behind his eyes. "You think you're brave now, huh? You think your fancy job makes you smarter than me?" "No," I said quietly. "Just freer." That hit him. I saw it. The glass in his hand, tilted whiskey spilling onto the rug. "You're not family," he said again, slower this time, like he was reminding himself. "You never were." I felt my pulse hammering, but kept my tone even. "You keep saying that. Maybe you're right." I stepped closer. "But you should know something. The trust doesn't agree with you." His head snapped up. "What did you say? Clause 14, I said. You remember it." His eyes narrowed, searching my face for how much I knew. "You've been talking to that old man. He's my family, isn't he?" He threw the glass. It shattered against the wall shards, bouncing off the floor. My mother screamed. He didn't hit me this time, but the threat in the air was heavier than any blow. "You don't know what you're messing with," he hissed. "Everything in this house exists because of me." "Everything in this house is stolen," I said. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then he laughed low and broken. "You sound just like your father." "Good," I said. "At least one of us should." I turned and walked upstairs before he could follow. My hands were shaking as I closed my bedroom door. I pulled the recorder from my pocket, stopped it, and replayed the last 30 seconds. His voice was clear. "You're not family. You don't know what you're messing with." I saved the file, renamed it Proof 1, and tucked the device into the lining of my jacket. For the next week, I lived in that house like a ghost, silent and careful. I worked nights, came home before dawn, and kept the cameras hidden in places Dean never looked behind the bookshelf near the mantel inside the smoke detector. Each one small enough to disappear. Each one recording everything. It was methodical, almost clinical. Every argument, every lie, every whisper, he thought no one heard. At first, nothing happened. He played nice, made breakfast, pretended to care. The calm before the storm. My mother started to believe it again. That was part of the cycle remorse charm rebuild. Then the control returns. I saw it coming like a weather pattern. The third night it began. He accused her of hiding money. She denied it. He slammed his fist on the table. The camera caught it all. I stayed upstairs, the recorder running in my pocket, listening through the vent as his voice rose and fell. "You're making me do this," he said. "If you just listened, I wouldn't have to yell." The line abusers always use blame disguised as logic. My mother's voice trembled. "Please, Dean." "Don't please me," he snapped. "Obey me." I wanted to run down, but I knew that would ruin everything. I needed proof, not chaos. My grandfather's words kept me still. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. Clear sound, perfect angle. His words echoing through my laptop speakers. Proof 2. Proof 3 came 2 days later when he confessed to using my mother's signature. He was drunk, bragging to a friend on the phone about how the idiot woman doesn't even know her name's on the papers. He laughed. I pressed record. By the end of the week, I had over 4 hours of evidence. Still, it wasn't enough for me. I wanted him to confess on camera to me. The final piece. Saturday night, I found the chance. He was in the garage fixing his truck drunk again. I walked in quietly, the recorder hidden in my sleeve. "Dean," I said, "you should stop drinking." He looked up, eyes glazed. "You should stop breathing my air." "That's funny," I said. "You didn't mind using my name when you forged those signatures." His face changed. "What did you just say?" "CMR Holdings," I said. "You thought naming it after us would hide what you were doing." He grabbed my arm. "You don't know anything." "I know enough," I said. "And so will the police." He froze, his grip tightening. "You wouldn't. Try me." He shoved me backward, but I caught the shelf to steady myself. "You think your grandpa can save you," he said, spitting the words. "That old man's as dead as your father." My vision blurred with rage. "You don't get to say his name." He laughed, cruel and slurred. "Why not? He couldn't save you either." I took a deep breath, forcing calm. "Say it again," I whispered. "Say what you did." "I did what I had to," he said, stepping closer. "I took what was owed." The recorder blinked red. "That was the moment." "You forged it," I said. "You stole from her," he sneered. "And what'll you do, sweetheart? Call Daddy Judge?" "He can't touch me." I stared at him, my hand in my coat pocket, gripping my phone. "He already has," I said. I walked out, leaving him yelling after me. Upstairs, I shut my door, heart pounding. I replayed the audio, my fingers trembling. His voice came through clearly. I did what I had to. I took what was owed. Confession clear as law. I sent the file to my grandfather, attached a single message: "It's done." 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with his reply. "Be ready. We move soon." I looked at the ceiling, the weight of everything pressing down. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt dangerous. In the hall, I heard Dean moving, pacing, muttering. He knew something had changed, even if he didn't know what. I lay back on the bed, the recorder still warm in my hand, and whispered into the dark. The truth just found its witness. 2 days after I sent my grandfather the recording, the storm finally came. It was a Sunday evening, gray light slipping through the blinds, the kind of quiet that happens right before everything collapses. My mother was in the kitchen humming faintly while stirring soup, pretending things were normal. Dean sat in his chair, the television droning on about local news, his glass never far from reach. I had stayed in my room most of the day, waiting, listening, knowing he felt the shift. You could hear it in the way he moved, shorter steps, heavier, breathing glances that lingered too long. When control starts to slip, men like Dean get desperate. Around 6, my phone buzzed with a single message from my grandfather. "Stand by. It's in motion." My heart pounded as I tucked the phone under a pillow and went downstairs. The air felt thick, the house too small for all that silence. Dean looked up from the couch. "Where have you been hiding upstairs?" I said. "Working." "Working on what myself?" He smirked. "That a new hobby? You should try obedience instead." "Doesn't suit me." He took a long sip, eyes locked on mine. "You think you've won something, don't you?" "I don't have to win," I said. "I just have to stop losing." He stood, his shadow cutting across the living room floor. "You're still talking like that old man's going to save you." "He doesn't need to," I said softly. "You already saved me." Every time you showed me who you really are." The words landed like a slap. His jaw clenched, his fingers curling into fists. "You think you're better than me? I know I'm free from you." He crossed the room in 2 steps, his face inches from mine. "Say that again." "Free." He shoved me backward. My shoulder hit the wall, pain flashing up my arm. My mother screamed his name, dropping the spoon soup, spilling across the floor. "Stop!" she cried. "Dean, please stop." But he didn't hear her. He grabbed my arm, shaking me hard enough to blur the room. "You ungrateful brat," he spat. "Everything you have is because of me." "Everything I have," I gasped, "is despite you." His hand rose. I saw it coming, but before he could swing, my mother lunged between us. His palm caught her shoulder, and in that moment, the world slowed. She stumbled backward, her heel catching on the rug. The sickening sound of her fall filled the air, her head striking the stairs with a crack that silenced everything. "Mom." I dropped beside her, my hands trembling as I checked for breath. She was dazed, blinking blood seeping near her temple. Dean froze, eyes wide, like even he hadn't meant for it to go this far. She fell," he stammered. "She fell." I looked up at him, fury burning cold in my chest. "Like I did." He took a step back, shaking his head. "Don't look at me like that." "Call an ambulance," I said. "Now." "No," he snapped. "No cops, no hospitals. She'll be fine. Call them or I will." He lunged for the phone in my hand, but I was faster. I sprinted to the front door, dialing 911 as I ran. "My mother's hurt," I said, voice shaking but clear. "Domestic assault. She's bleeding." "Is the assailant still there?" the operator asked. I looked over my shoulder. Dean was standing halfway down the hall, breathing heavy, eyes wild. "Yes," I said. "He's here. Stay on the line. Officers are on their way." I ended the call before she could say more. Dean's face twisted. "You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have touched her," I said. He took another step forward, then froze as sirens echoed faintly in the distance. His mask cracked, fear flickered through his eyes. "You ruined everything," he whispered. "No, Dean," I said, backing toward my mother. "You did that all by yourself." I knelt beside her, pressing a towel against the wound. Her eyes fluttered open. "Clara." "It's okay, Mom," I whispered. "Help's coming." He didn't mean, "Don't," I said softly. "Don't protect him this time." The red and blue lights flashed through the window seconds later, reflecting across the walls like a judgment. Dean stood frozen, caught between running and pretending. He chose the latter, straightening his shirt, trying to compose himself. "She slipped," he muttered. "You'll say that right," I didn't answer. The knock at the door was firm, official. "Police department, open up." I stood and opened it. The same officer from before Detective Lewis stepped inside with 2 uniforms. His eyes scanned the scene, the broken glass, the blood, the shaking woman on the floor. "Same address," he said quietly to his partner. "I knew we'd be back." Dean tried to speak. "She fell." "Save it," Lewis said. "We'll sort it out downtown." He motioned for an EMT who guided my mother gently to a stretcher. She gripped my hand weakly as they lifted her. "I'll be right behind you," I promised. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Dean watched, jaw working, but he didn't move when they cuffed him. "You can't do this," he barked. "I'm one of you." "Not tonight," Lewis said coldly. They led him outside into the flashing lights. The cold air rushed in clean and final. I stood in the doorway, my whole body trembling. The officer turned back to me. "You okay, ma'am?" "I think so," I said, though my voice broke. "We'll need your statement at the station." I nodded. "I'll come after the hospital." When the door shut behind them, the house fell into silence again. But it was a different kind of quiet one that felt like breath after drowning. I looked down at the blood-stained towel in my hand, then at the empty space where Dean had stood. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: he would never hurt us again. I picked up my phone, opened my messages, and typed to my grandfather. "It's time." 2 days after the arrest, the house felt hollow. My mother was recovering at St. Paul Hospital, her head wrapped in white bandages, her voice faint but steady. Dean was out on bail. I should have expected it. Former cops rarely stayed behind bars for long, not in small towns where everyone owed someone a favor. I stood by the window staring at the driveway where his truck used to sit, waiting for the sound of tires crunching gravel. Nothing yet, but I could feel the threat breathing just beyond the silence. My phone buzzed an email from the county clerk. Protective order pending review. I called my grandfather. They released him. I said, my voice breaking halfway. Of course they did, he said, calm as always. His friends will circle the wagons. They always do. Then what now? He'll come back. Not if we finish this the right way. I need you to come to Duluth again. The trust hearing is set for Thursday. Trust hearing, it's time we take this out of their hands. His tone left no room for doubt. Bring the recordings, the claim copy, and your composure. What if he stops me? He won't, he said simply. Men like him always underestimate the cleanup crew. That was his word for justice, the cleanup crew. I drove to the hospital before heading north. My mother looked smaller in that bed, fragile but finally resting. When she saw me, she tried to smile. He called, she whispered. From jail. Don't answer if he does again. He said, he still loves me. Mom. I said gently, love doesn't leave bruises. She turned her face toward the window, tears shining in the light. What are you going to do? End it. You'll get hurt. Not this time. I kissed her forehead, promising I'd call. As I drove toward Duluth, the clouds pressed low, the landscape passing in gray blurs. Every mile felt like pulling a knife out slowly. I thought about all the women who never got to drive away, who stayed and believed apologies were enough. The courthouse sat like a fortress above the lake. Inside, marble floors reflected the gray daylight, and the echo of footsteps felt almost sacred. My grandfather was waiting outside the conference room, his cane tapping the floor. Ready, he asked. As I'll ever be. He opened the door. The room was full, 2 attorneys, a trustee, and Dean's lawyer, a smug man with expensive shoes and a smirk that made my skin crawl. Dean wasn't there, at least not yet. We'll begin when all parties are present, the trustee said. My grandfather nodded and sat beside me. Don't speak unless you're spoken to, he whispered. Let the truth do the work. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Dean walked in wearing a pressed suit, freshly shaved, like the man who used to fool neighbors into thinking he was a hero. His eyes met mine. No remorse. Just calculation. His lawyer stood. My client is here to clarify the misunderstanding surrounding the Reynolds Trust and recent events at his home. Misunderstanding. My grandfather repeated the word, tasting bitter. You forged documents, assaulted family members, and laundered estate funds. Which part is unclear? Alleged, the lawyer corrected. And we'll be filing for dismissal. The trustee raised a hand. Mr. Reynolds, please allow the hearing to proceed in order. Dean leaned back confident. Go ahead. Let's hear the story. My grandfather opened a folder, sliding copies of transfers, forged signatures, and the insurance claim into view. These are the documents you filed, Dean. Your wife's name appears here, but the handwriting analysis says otherwise. Dean smirked. You really think anyone cares about some ink test? They might care about your voice, I said, pulling out my phone. I pressed play. His recorded confession filled the room. I did what I had to. I took what was owed. The silence that followed was perfect. The trustee blinked, clearly rattled. Dean's lawyer started to speak, but my grandfather raised a finger. Clause 14, he said. You disowned my granddaughter in that recording when you said she was not family. Under the trust's own language that forfeits all your rights. That clause is symbolic, the lawyer snapped. Not legal. It is when I wrote it, my grandfather said, his tone like steel. Dean stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. You set me up, he said. You two worked together. You set yourself up, I replied. I just hit record. The trustee cleared his throat. Based on the evidence presented, we'll be freezing all associated accounts pending investigation. Until then, Mr. Reynolds, you have no legal access to the trust or its assets. You can't do that, Dean shouted. I built this family. No, my grandfather said softly. You broke it. The trustee gathered the papers, signaling the hearing's end. Dean turned toward me, his face twisted with fury. You think this is over? You have no idea what I can do. You're right, I said. I don't, but I know what you can't do anymore. The officers waiting in the hall stepped in, escorting him out for questioning on the financial charges. His voice echoed down the corridor, rage, denial, panic. My grandfather exhaled slowly. That, he said, is the sound of a man realizing control has a clock. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and relentless. The courthouse steps glistened under the gray sky. So it's done, I asked. The legal part, yes, he said. Justice, not yet. But it's coming. As we reached his car, my phone buzzed with a message from Detective Lewis. DA reopening the 2018 case. We'll need your statement. I looked at my grandfather. They're reopening it. He smiled faintly. Good. It's time the law caught up with the truth. I looked back at the courthouse doors, at the world that once belonged to him but now answered to me. He won't go quietly, I said. He never does, he replied, but this time he'll go legally. The day of the formal trust hearing arrived with the kind of cold that made the air itself feel sharp. The courthouse in Duluth stood like a monument to old power, its marble columns streaked with frost and time. I wore my father's watch under my sleeve, its quiet tick grounding me every time doubt crept in. My grandfather had already arrived when I stepped through the doors, his presence commanding the space without needing to speak. He nodded at me once, steady, calm, proud. This is where the noise ends, he said. After today, truth has a face. The room where the hearing was held wasn't a courtroom but a large conference chamber lined with bookshelves and gold-trimmed portraits of past trustees. At the long, polished table sat the trust's legal board, 2 attorneys for the estate, and a handful of observers, all waiting for the same man who had once convinced everyone he was the family's savior. Dean entered 10 minutes late, his lawyer trailing behind him. He wore his best suit pressed to perfection and the confident swagger of a man who still believed he could bend reality. He glanced at me, his smirk small and poisonous. "Nice of you to play dress-up," he whispered as he passed. I didn't respond. The trustee, an older woman named Judge Erica Lund, cleared her throat. "We're here to resolve the matter of the Pierce Reynolds Trust following allegations of forgery, misappropriation, and domestic misconduct. All parties have been notified, and the evidence will be presented in full before the board's ruling." My grandfather leaned forward slightly. "Proceed." The clerk began reading through documents, lists of properties, financial transfers, account numbers. Each line was a piece of the empire Dean had built on stolen ground. His lawyer interrupted twice, objecting to phrasing to jurisdiction to tone. Judge Lund ignored him both times. When it was my turn to speak, the room fell quiet. I stood holding the USB drive like it was both a weapon and a wound. "Everything I'm about to play was recorded over the last 2 weeks," I said. "I didn't plan to become a spy in my own home." But the truth left me no other choice. I pressed play. The speakers filled with Dean's voice, his anger, his threats, his confession. The words echoed off marble walls. "You're not family." I did what I had to. I took what was owed. There was no mistaking it. Every syllable was soaked in entitlement. The sound of my mother crying in the background hit harder than I expected. I watched Dean's expression shift first. Irritation, then disbelief, then panic. "This is illegal," he snapped. "You can't record someone without consent." Judge Lund looked unimpressed. "You're mistaken, Mr. Reynolds. Minnesota is a one-party consent state. She was within her rights." His lawyer tried to recover. "Even so, context matters. He was intoxicated. These recordings don't prove criminal intent." My grandfather's voice cut through the noise. "They prove character, and in matters of trust law, character defines eligibility." The judge nodded. "Clause 14, I believe." "Correct," he said. He turned to Dean, his eyes colder than I'd ever seen them. "You said she wasn't family, Dean. Those were your words. And under Clause 14, disowning a blood descendant terminates all claim to the Pierce estate." Dean slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. That clause was symbolic. So was my patience, my grandfather said. And both just ran out. Laughter rippled quietly through the room, not mockery, but disbelief that a man like Dean could fall so fast. He turned to me, desperation cutting through his arrogance. "You're doing this to destroy me." No, I said softly. You did that to yourself. I'm just showing the replay. He started pacing. You think this board cares about your bruises, about your sob story? I built this family. I gave your mother a roof, food security. And you, he pointed at me, trembling, you brought cops into my house. Because you turned it into a crime scene, I said. You taught me that silence is safety, but it was just another way to make me small. I'm done being small. My voice shook but didn't break. The judge raised her hand. Enough. Mr. Reynolds, sit down. He didn't move. His lawyer tugged his sleeve, whispering urgently, but Dean ignored him. You'll regret this, he hissed. When this goes public, everyone will see what you are, a manipulative little liar riding your old man's coattails. My grandfather stood slowly, the weight of decades of authority filling the room. I was a judge for 40 years, he said. I've seen every kind of man try to rewrite the truth. You're all the same. You mistake fear for respect. He took a step closer to Dean, but not today. The judge cleared her throat again. The board will deliberate for 10 minutes. We waited in silence. Dean sat rigid, his jaw grinding, while I kept my eyes on the snow outside. It fell steady, unhurried, indifferent to the storm inside the room. When the board returned, Judge Lund spoke with calm precision. The findings are clear. Due to the recorded admission of disownment corroborated by evidence of financial misconduct, Dean Reynolds is hereby stripped of all rights and privileges under the Pierce Reynolds Trust, effective immediately. The assets in question will revert to the surviving bloodline and charitable branches as outlined in the original will. Dean's lawyer started to protest, but she raised her voice slightly. This hearing is concluded. Mr. Reynolds, you will vacate any property owned under the trust within 72 hours pending legal confirmation. The sound of the gavel striking the desk was quiet, but final. Dean's face went pale. You can't do this, he said, voice cracking. You can't take everything. My grandfather met his gaze. You took enough already. Dean's composure shattered. I'll appeal. You'll see. You can't erase me. No one's erasing you, I said. You'll be remembered, just not the way you want. He lunged toward the table, but the bailiff was faster stepping between us. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I watched him struggle against the hands holding him back. For the first time in my life, he looked small, just another man caught in the wreckage of his own arrogance. The judge ordered security to escort him out. As they dragged him toward the door, he turned one last time. You think this makes you strong? You're still that scared little girl hiding behind your mother. Maybe, I said quietly, but at least I'm not hiding behind a badge. He didn't answer. The door slammed behind him and the room exhaled. My grandfather placed his hand on mine. Justice isn't loud, he said. It's consistent. I nodded, tears burning my eyes. I didn't think it would feel like this. Like what? Not triumphant. Just quiet. That's how justice sounds, he said. After the shouting stops. Outside, the snow had turned to light flurries. Reporters were already gathering at the courthouse steps, words spreading faster than I could breathe. My grandfather squeezed my hand. You don't have to say anything, he told me. Let the papers talk. The truth doesn't need your voice anymore. But I wanted it to. I walked down the steps and faced the cameras, the flashbulbs, the chaos. Do you have a statement? Someone called out. I took a deep breath. Family isn't blood, I said. It's behavior. And today, behavior won. The microphones crowded closer, but that was all I said. My grandfather joined me at the car, his expression unreadable. You handled that better than I did at your age, he said. You wrote the playbook, I replied. He smiled faintly. No, you just learned to read it. As we drove away, the courthouse faded into the distance. The lake reflected the last light of day, calm and silver. I leaned back, exhaustion washing through me. What happens now? Now, he said. We start rebuilding what he tried to destroy. I closed my eyes and listened to the steady rhythm of the tires on the road. For the first time in years, every sound outside the car felt like something I could trust. The headlines hit the next morning. Former Officer Dean Reynolds stripped of family trust after allegations of abuse and fraud. The photo below it was one of him being escorted out of the courthouse, his expression caught between rage and disbelief. My phone buzzed constantly. Reporters, old neighbors, even distant relatives who suddenly remembered my number. I turned it all off. I didn't need noise. The silence felt cleaner now, sharper but no longer dangerous. My mother was discharged that afternoon. She looked fragile under the hospital's fluorescent lights, like a person just learning to breathe again. When I walked in, she smiled weakly. "It's over," she asked. "Mostly," I said. The trust hearing ruled against him. The DA's office reopened the old case too. Her smile faltered. "He'll hate you for that." "He already did," I said softly. She reached for my hand. "I don't know how to start over." "You already have." "You left." Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded. "Where will we go?" "Grandpa said we could stay in Duluth until we figure it out." "The house there's quiet." "You'll like it." "What about this one?" she asked, glancing at the window as if the old home itself might be listening. "He'll have to leave," I said. "The trust owns it. Once the legal transfer clears, it's no longer his to touch." "And you?" she asked. "Where will you go? I'll stay nearby for a while." "See the case through. After that, I don't know." The doctor came in to give her discharge papers, and I stepped outside needing air. The parking lot was half covered in ice, but the sun had broken through the clouds for the first time in weeks. I called my grandfather. "She's ready to leave," I said. "Good," he replied. "The paperwork's already moving. His accounts have been frozen, and the DA will handle the criminal side." "He'll fight," I said. "Let him," my grandfather answered. "It keeps him busy while the world moves on without him." I almost smiled. "You sound like you've done this before." "Justice," he said dryly, "is just repetition with better paperwork." We laughed quietly, and for a brief second, everything felt almost normal. Later that evening, I drove my mother to Duluth. The road stretched long and silent, the world outside, turning from gray to deep blue. She dozed off halfway through, her head resting against the window, her breathing steady. I watched the reflection of the highway lights slide across her face and thought about how many nights I'd imagined this drive, just us leaving that house behind. When we arrived, my grandfather met us at the door. He helped her inside, his movements careful but firm. "Welcome home," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. She looked around the living room, her eyes filling again. "I used to bring Clara here when she was little," he said. Before. My mother whispered. "I remember the lake." "It's still there," he said. "Some things don't change." She smiled faintly. "Thank you, Walter." "Don't thank me," he said. "Just heal." I spent the next few days cleaning out the guest rooms, setting up new bedding, helping my mother adjust to the rhythm of the quiet. The first night she couldn't sleep. "Every sound makes me jump," she whispered. "It's strange, isn't it? To be free and still afraid." "It takes time," I said. "Freedom's not silence, it's trust." She nodded, tears glistening. "Do you forgive him?" she asked suddenly. I hesitated. "No," I said. "But I don't hate him anymore either. I just don't owe him anything." The next morning, the DA's office called. They had officially reopened the 2018 investigation into Dean's prior assaults cases that had been buried by his friends in uniform. "We'll need your statement," Detective Lewis said. "You'll have support during testimony," when I asked. 2 weeks. I'll be there." I hung up, realizing my hands were steady. The fear that once lived in my bones had nowhere left to hide. That afternoon, I helped my grandfather organize the trust documents for the final audit. "You handled yourself well," he said as he flipped through papers. "You didn't let anger write your story." "I learned from you," I said. "No," he corrected. "You learned from surviving." He paused, looking at me. "You know, I used to think justice was about punishment. But watching you, I think it's about restoration." "Restoration," I repeated. "You mean peace." "Peace built on proof," he said, "not denial." The phrase stayed with me. That night, I walked outside to the porch. The lake was frozen again, reflecting the soft orange light of the house behind me. I stood there in my coat, listening to the faint creak of ice under the wind, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to break. I just felt present. My phone buzzed an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Clara. The voice rasped. Dean, how did you get this number? You forget. I know everything. His voice was strained raw. You think this is over, don't you? It is. You ruined me. No, I said quietly. You did that all by yourself. You think anyone cares they'll forget? Maybe I said, but I won't. He laughed bitterly. You sound like him. The old man, always talking about truth and law. Guess it runs in the blood. Guess it does, I said and ended the call. My grandfather opened the door behind me, concern etched on his face. He won't stop trying to rattle you, he said, then I'll stop answering. Good, he said, smiling faintly. That's the first rule of victory, don't wrestle with ghosts. What's the second, I asked. Live better than they ever imagined. Inside, my mother was asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, the fire casting soft light across her face. I stood there watching her, realizing that survival isn't about escape, it's about rebuilding something gentler from the wreckage. Dean's trial would come, the trust would settle, the news would fade. But the sound of my mother's quiet breathing, that was the real verdict. Justice didn't roar, it exhaled. Winter began to fade slowly that year, like a wound closing under the surface. Snow melted into thin rivers down the roads. The lake cracked and sighed as the ice broke apart and light started to stay a little longer each evening. Duluth turned from white to gray to something that felt almost alive again. The house became our sanctuary, the fireplace always warm, my grandfather's quiet footsteps steady upstairs, and my mother's voice, fragile but returning, humming softly while she cooked. It took weeks before I realized the silence in the house had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It breathed. I started writing again. Nothing grand, just fragments. Thoughts, letters I'd never send. Sometimes at night, I'd sit by the window notebook, open the world outside, dark except for the reflection of my own face, and I'd try to remember who I had been before fear became a habit. My mother often joined me wrapped in a shawl, her hands holding tea that she never finished. It feels strange to live without waiting for footsteps, she said one evening. I still wake up thinking I need to be quiet. Me too, I admitted. But maybe quiet means something different now. She smiled. Like peace, like freedom, I said. Peace will come after. My grandfather, meanwhile, kept himself busy closing the remaining legal loops. Every few days, I'd find him in his study surrounded by files, muttering about paper trails and loose ends. He'd wave me off whenever I offered help. I built this mess, he'd say. Let me clean it. But one evening, he called me in. Do you know why I kept you on the trust, even after your father died? He asked. Because you loved me, I teased gently. He smiled. Because I knew one day you'd have to stand for yourself. And when that day came, I wanted you to have the tools, not just the pain. He handed me a folder. Inside was a copy of his will. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because I'm tired, he said simply. And because legacy isn't about property, it's about direction. When I'm gone, you decide what happens next with the trust, the foundation, all of it. I'm not ready for that. No one ever is, he said, but readiness isn't the same as worthiness. You've earned both. His words stayed with me long after he went to bed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked down to the frozen edge of the lake, my boots sinking slightly into the slush. The moon was high, pale, and steady. I thought of all the women like my mother living lives half-lived because fear had rewritten their stories. I thought of the younger version of myself standing in that broken living room, hearing him say, "You're not family." I wanted to reach back and tell her she'd make it out, that she'd stop shaking one day, that survival wasn't weakness, it was proof of endurance. A week later, I met with Detective Lewis to give my final statement. The office smelled like burnt coffee and paper. He listened, typing occasionally, never interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back studying me. You know, he said, most cases like this never make it to trial. People withdraw or the system grinds them down. I almost did, I admitted. What changed? Someone finally told me I wasn't crazy for wanting justice. Your grandfather, he guessed. And my own reflection, I said. He nodded, closing the file. We'll keep you updated. But between you and me, he won't walk away from this one. I'm not doing this for revenge, I said. I know, he replied. That's why it'll matter. Outside, the snow had almost vanished, leaving behind patches of brown earth. I stood there for a long time before getting into my car. The world felt larger again, like it had been waiting for me to notice it. When I got home, my mother was planting flowers in the small garden behind the house. Her movements were slow, deliberate, like someone relearning how to exist without fear of breaking something. "They're forget-me-nots," she said when she saw me watching. "Seemed fitting." I knelt beside her, pressing my hands into the cool soil. "You think they'll grow?" "They always do," she said, "even after frost." I realized then how much she'd changed. The woman who used to apologize for every bruise now spoke softly but firmly, like someone who'd finally stepped out of a long shadow. That night, I posted something online, a thread that began with one sentence. "Silence isn't safety, it's surrender." The story spread quickly. Messages came from women across the country, teachers, nurses, mothers, strangers who'd been told to stay quiet too. Some said thank you. Some just said me too. I read every one. It was overwhelming, humbling, and healing in a way therapy never could be. The next morning, my grandfather walked in holding a newspaper. "You've gone viral," he said dryly. "Apparently, the internet likes survivors with syntax." I laughed. "Guess we're trending now." "You earned that," he said, his voice softening. "What's the hashtag? Hashtag justice is family." He nodded approvingly. "Fitting." Over the next month, the case moved forward. The DA built a strong file: financial crimes, domestic assault, falsified records. Dean's defense crumbled under the weight of evidence, the recordings, and his own arrogance. He tried to intimidate witnesses from jail, and that sealed his fate. The conviction came quietly, without drama. 10 years for fraud, 5 consecutive for assault parole denied. When the verdict came through, I didn't cry. I just exhaled. My mother did, though tears of something that wasn't sorrow anymore, but release. "He can't hurt anyone again," she said. "No," I replied. "And now, neither can silence." Spring arrived. The house filled with light. My grandfather spent more time on the porch, reading, occasionally watching my mother tend to the flowers. Sometimes he'd call out, "Water them, don't drown them." She'd roll her eyes and smile. The scars on her forehead had faded to thin lines. Mine had too. But some scars don't show. They hum quietly beneath the skin, reminding you what you survived. One evening, we had dinner together, our first truly peaceful meal in years. My grandfather poured a small glass of whiskey, lifted it, and said, "To truth." My mother added, "To survival." I raised mine. "To legacy." "Legacy?" he repeated. "Now that's a word with weight." After dinner, I walked out to the dock. The water shimmered under the last light of dusk. My reflection moved with the ripples softer than before. I thought about all the versions of myself that had led to this moment: the daughter who stayed quiet, the woman who broke, the survivor who spoke. They all lived inside me still, but none of them ruled anymore. Behind me, my grandfather called out, "You planning to fall in?" "Maybe," I said. "You'd freeze," he said. "Worth the clarity," I replied. He laughed, the kind of laugh that sounded like he hadn't used it in years. The sound carried across the water, warm and alive. That night, I started a journal titled After. The first page read, "I used to think silence kept us safe, but silence was his weapon. Speaking didn't just free me, it broke the chain for everyone who'd been told their pain was inconvenient. I didn't know who I was writing for: myself, my mother, or the strangers online, but I wrote anyway. Some nights I'd share excerpts on social media, small truths about healing. They spread quietly like seeds. Women sent photos of themselves holding signs that read, "Proof, not revenge." One even tattooed it on her wrist. My grandfather found that one particularly poetic. When words mark skin, he said, "You know they mattered." Months passed. The world moved on, but ours didn't need to. My mother started volunteering at a women's shelter in town. "If someone had told me I wasn't crazy back then," she said one morning while getting ready, "I might have left sooner." "Then go tell someone else now," I said. "Make them believe it." "That's the plan," she said, smiling. My grandfather began mentoring young law students again, teaching them about ethical advocacy. Justice isn't an event, he told them once, it's maintenance. Keep it clean. He'd always loved that phrase, the maintenance of justice. As for me, I joined a survivor advocacy group helping build awareness programs about financial abuse in domestic relationships. It wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. People listened. I learned that justice wasn't a straight line. It was a spiral looping back until you faced yourself. Sometimes I still woke up from dreams of the old house, the sound of glass breaking, my mother screaming, the sting of his voice saying, "You're not family." But in those dreams, I wasn't powerless anymore. I stood up, looked him in the eye, and said, "No, I'm more family than you'll ever be." One evening in early summer, we visited the courthouse again, not for a case, but for the unveiling of a new plaque in honor of retired judges. My grandfather's name gleamed near the center, Honorable Walter Pierce, a lifetime of integrity. He stood beside it, eyes moist, pretending it was dust. "You did good, Grandpa," I said. "We did good," he corrected. "You reminded me what justice looks like when it's personal." On the way home, he turned to me. "What will you do next?" "Keep talking," I said. "There's still so much silence out there." He nodded. "Then speak loud enough for the ones who can't." Later that night, I stood by the window again, notebook open. Outside, the moon shimmered over the water, reflecting a calm I'd never known before. My voiceover, if there had been one, would have said, "Every family has its own war. Some we fight for blood, others for honor. But the greatest victory is when truth becomes our inheritance." The house creaked softly behind me, the sound of safety settling in. I closed the notebook and whispered to the quiet, "Justice doesn't need noise, just proof." And for the first time in my life, proof was enough. The wind off Lake Superior carried a quiet rhythm the night everything finally settled. The house glowed faintly under the porch light, its reflection trembling across the thawed water. Inside, my mother was asleep on the couch, the fire casting a soft amber hue over her face. My grandfather had gone to bed early, his cane resting by the stairs, the weight of decades finally allowed to rest with him. I stood by the window watching the lake breathe, thinking about how life had shifted from survival to something close to peace. The trial, the hearings, the headlines, they all felt like echoes, now distant ripples of a storm that had already passed. Yet peace doesn't come with silence alone. It comes with acknowledgement, with the kind of truth you don't hide anymore. That was what I wanted to build next, a truth that didn't need defending. I turned on my camera, the one I had once used to record evidence, and faced it for the first time without fear. My voice was steady low but clear. "Every bruise fades, I began. Every wound eventually closes. But truth doesn't fade. It doesn't heal away. It stays waiting for you to face it." I paused, breathing through the lump in my throat. For years, I thought if I stayed quiet, I could keep us safe. That if I just played along, maybe love would stop hurting. But silence isn't protection, it's participation. And I was done participating in my own erasure. I took a long breath and continued. To anyone listening, if someone tells you that you're not family, that you don't belong, that you should be grateful for their control, hear me clearly. Family isn't the blood that breaks you, it's the people who help you heal. I lifted my father's watch toward the camera. This belonged to a man who believed in proof, not promises. My grandfather taught me that justice doesn't need to scream to be real. It just needs to stand. I walked out onto the porch, camera still recording, and turned it toward the lake where the moon stretched across the water like a line of light. "If you're watching this," I said softly, "tell me where you are. Drop your city and local time below. Because every time someone does, it reminds me that truth travels farther than fear, that we're not alone even when the world wants us quiet." I could almost imagine the comments rolling in small towns, big cities, late-night shifts, early mornings, people connecting not through tragedy but through resilience. That's what I wanted this story to become. Not just mine, but everyone's. I lowered the camera and whispered, "If you believe family is behavior, not blood, stand with me." The screen faded to black, but my words lingered, written across the closing frame. Justice is family. Silence is surrender. When I stopped recording, I didn't replay it. Some stories don't need editing, they just need to exist. Inside, I found my grandfather awake again, standing by the stairway. "You were talking to someone out there?" he asked, smiling faintly. "Maybe everyone I said." "Good," he replied. "Stories are only useful if they make someone braver than you were yesterday." He leaned on his cane. "You've turned your pain into language. That's the rarest kind of alchemy." I laughed softly. "Guess we're all alchemists here." "Not all," he said. "Just the ones who choose to stay." The next morning, I woke early and walked down to the lake. The air was cool and bright, and for the first time in months, I felt no weight pressing on my chest. I watched the sunlight ripple across the water, golden and endless, and thought about everything we'd survived: the blows, the silence, the courtrooms, the long nights filled with doubt. I thought about the girl who once believed her voice didn't matter. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. She mattered. She always had. Later that day, my mother joined me on the dock. "You posted it," she said quietly. "Yeah." "Are you afraid?" "No," I said, "just exposed." "But in a good way." "He'd hate that," she said, smiling faintly. "Then it's perfect." She laughed softly. "You always did know how to hit where it hurts." "I learned from the best," I said, nudging her shoulder. We sat together for a long time, our reflections rippling side by side on the water. The world wasn't fixed, not completely, but it was better. I could live with that. When evening came, messages flooded in again, thousands this time. Women from different states, different countries, writing things like, "I left today because of you," or "You helped me remember who I was." I read each one until the words blurred through tears. Somewhere between those messages and the quiet hum of the night, I realized this story was never about revenge. It was about reclamation. Taking back a voice, a name, a life. My grandfather's voice came from behind me, low and calm. "You did more good in a few weeks than most of us do in a lifetime." "I just told the truth," I said. "Exactly," he said. "And you made people listen." He placed his hand on my shoulder. "Now rest. You've earned it." I nodded, but before I went inside, I looked once more at the lake glowing under the moon. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" I asked. "Always," he said. "But for once, I'm not worried about it." He went inside, leaving me alone with the sound of the water and the whisper of wind through the trees. I thought of my father, of every man and woman who'd ever been silenced, and I whispered to the night. For once, the law came home. The fire crackled inside the house, breathing softly around us. I sat down, opened my notebook, and wrote one last line beneath all the others. If you're watching this, if you've ever doubted that truth can win, let my story be your proof. Justice doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be heard. Then I closed the book, turned off the light, and let the quiet fill the room, not as something to fear anymore, but as a kind of prayer that finally, after all these years, the noise was gone and the truth had stayed.